Friends, I want to welcome you to our first ever NetSuite training webinar. Uh, Thank you for joining. Many have joined live today as we're doing this, but as you probably just heard if you were on, I started recording. So all of these webinars will be recorded and will be made available to you to look at anytime in the future on netsuite.helpscoutdocs.com. I'll send out a link afterwards so that I make sure and give you the right address. But a couple housekeeping things before we get started. You'll notice that when you enter, you're automatically muted. And I'd like everybody to stay muted during the presentation because there are at least 50, maybe as many as 100 participants today. So if you have questions, you can use the chat feature, and I believe I set it so that you can only chat to me. So feel free to send me messages via the chat. I'm watching that the whole time, and I'll make sure that Timothy hears the things that he needs to hear, or I'll answer questions in the background. And I would assume that we'll have some time for question and answer and discussion at the end, I hope. So again, thanks everybody for joining. Lord, bless this time and help us to have great communication and understanding and solid bandwidth and technology throughout this whole webinar. Timothy Bantola, many of you know. Timothy is originally from the Philippines, has served in the Philippines as well as in East Asia Opportunities, and now serves on the Global International Finance Ministry, the IFM team. And he has quickly become the global expert in NetSuite, particularly in the general accounting area. And so Timothy is going to teach us this month on international transmittals, the first of a two-part series on international transmittals. Timothy, thanks for teaching us. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dave. So I'm really glad for everyone who's able to make it for this webinar. This is the first, so we're sure to learn a lot from this particular webinar, and hopefully use all that we learned here to build upon the next webinars. This is not going to be a lot of time. It's just 1 hour, and we definitely do want to leave time at the end, or not even at the end, but a significant chunk of time for this hour to accommodate questions and be able to answer them. So the hope is everything that we'll cover this hour will be what you need, or what most of the ones attending this seminar need. And so as David mentioned, I'll just echo that. If there's questions, please type them in the chat. And as soon as I maximized my presentation screen, I lost sight of the WebEx. I was wanting to first read the results of the poll before I go ahead and get started. Let me see if I can do that real quick. So for those of you who have not yet answered the poll, please do so, and just so we can get to know who are the participants in right now. And
can you share the poll results? Can you share them on the screen?
Right, yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Somehow my my WebEx disappeared. Let's see if I can do that real quick without wasting a lot of time. Maybe I need to stop sharing for that to happen. Okay. There. Wow. I stopped sharing and saw all the participants in there. But so if I could, it seems I need to close the poll first before I can officially share it with everyone. So because there's still 20 who had not yet answered, I'm just going to read the answers of those who are here. What's your primary NetSuite role? 11 answered finance leaders. 8 are other. So um, if I can just get a quick shout out, if you can write on the chat if you are one of those 9 who answered other, what those are, and maybe David can read those. Um, and then what ministry are you representing in? Most answered 10 for country, and so most are countries. Most are in the 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. time zone. So thank you if you are here past your office hours. Thank you for being here. And so more answers are coming in, but finance leader is still the majority, and country is still the majority. And so 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. and then 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So at least we have most people here in a reasonable time zone. I don't see any answers yet. Although there is one person in the 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. time zone. So thank you so much for being here. And rate your experience in using NetSuite Transmittals. I see 2 people who answered 10. So, um, and then I see 8 people who has the most answers in number 1. So we have a good mix here in this room. So hopefully um, there's something in here that everyone can learn from, make your job easier as you move forward in using NetSuite. And at the end of this hour, we'll again after the questions, we'll also continue to invite you to send your questions to your specific area offices, help scout email address so they can help you, or if you're working at an area office, to send it to the netsuite.help so we can help you. Again, I'm very excited for the sheer number of people I'm seeing in the participants list right now. And so let's go dive in and get started. I'm going to present this again.
Timothy, can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, loud and clear.
So sorry, everybody. My WebEx has frozen. So maybe because so many people are in here, but my my chat isn't really. Uh,
So, Dave. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. But Dave, whenever you get back on, you can share with us what the other roles are. So if you have not yet answered the poll, I see there's still about 20 out of 51 who have not yet answered. We'd still love to hear your answers. We'll share the rest of the answers at the end of this hour. Please go ahead and do that. And so I'm using a general slide deck here for transmittals. Although for this hour, because we really don't have a lot of time, we'll be focusing on just incoming transmittals. How to receive that transmittals, what to do with the transmittal entries that you receive so that you can get meaningful information out of it. So this general slide deck, you can see there's objectives on transmittals in general, both outgoing and incoming. But we'll be skipping some of the slides that deal mostly with outgoing transmittals or how to send out transmittal entries. So we'll be focusing on incoming mostly. So, but we do want to understand entries that trigger transmittal items automatically versus entries that require manual transmittal entry. We want to understand and be able to create various types of transmittal entries. Uh, wait, am I sharing my screen? I don't think I am.
you're not, Timothy. Go, please do.
Yep, share. So again, these are the things we're learning that we will certainly try to do better at in next webinars. Okay, and and we want to understand and be able to create various types of transmittal entries. And we probably will be skipping 3, 4, and 5, but jump into number 6, where we want to understand and journalize or make journal entries of the transmittals that we receive. So we'll start with a little definition of terms. So intercompany journal entries is the first one that we will be using a lot. So we are all familiar with what a JE or a journal entry is. So an intercompany journal entry is it's one journal that affects more than one entity. And this is the mechanism by which we make the transmittals work in NetSuite. So we'll call them ICJEs for short. So even you, in your country role, you have access to only one country, but when you create a transmittal entry, it affects the books of not just your country, but for every other country up to the destination country. And so the transmittal system will create intercompany journal entries or ICJEs between the initiating and receiving entities. So at this call, I'll mostly be using the term source and destination entity. So source is the country that started the transmittal entry, and destination is the country or ministry that will ultimately receive it. Because if you say receiving, we found it to be quite confusing because the source country also basically received the funds first. And then an ICJE will be created for each step of the transmittal flow. So another term that we will be using a lot of is the name field on the transmittal entry using a customer and vendor record. So just wanted to emphasize like one of the things moving into NetSuite is just a paradigm shift, a different way of thinking about our transactions. Before NetSuite, basically everything is a GL account and an RC. For the finance people, accountants in the room, that's basically how we think about every transaction. It has a what and a who. The what is the GL account and the who is the responsibility center. But with NetSuite, you still have the what, obviously the GL account, but the who is now expanded to not just the responsibility center, but it has the name field for customer and vendor record. It has the staff unit. It has the MCC. So basically, we have different financial segments that break down what we previously just used as RC now are all different records to segment that information. So you can have the same RC broken down into several different name fields, and later on I can show you an example of how that works within NetSuite. So transmittal entry is another term that we want to define to begin with. It's a record of information for sending funds from one entity to another within Campus Crusade for Christ International that triggers the creation of ICJEs. So it's an ICJE and a transmittal entry are two different things that we must not confuse. Um, so later on, I'll explain more of the difference between them. But basically, a transmittal entry is not a journal entry. It's just the record of information that when a transmittal entry is created, in turn, it triggers the creation of different types of ICJEs. And there's four types of different transmittal entries: a donation, a subsidy, a charge, and other income. And so these different types of transmittal entries, when they are created, will trigger a different set of ICJEs. A different set of GL accounts will be triggered depending on what transmittal entry is created. So at this point, I'm just going to alt tab to kind of where you can see this in NetSuite. So let me just, for example, we are in NetSuite, and uh, if you are to create a new transmittal entry, so this is the training environment, training sandbox in NetSuite. If you go to transactions, transmittals, transmittal entries, and new, so I'm just showing what those four different types of transmittal entries, where you can find them. So it's here. So when you see this custom form in a transmittal entry, when you create a transmittal entry, depending on what you select in this custom form, so if you select a donation type transmittal entry, then the corresponding journal entry will be different from what it would be if created the charge. And we'll explore more about this when sending in our next webinar about outgoing transmittals. And then entity. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page here, because this is a new term, short for CCC reporting entity. It could be either a country ministry or an area office or a school, basically a standalone. Uh, so in NetSuite, in native terms, NetSuite calls this a subsidiary. But so if you do use NetSuite and see the term subsidiary, this is what it means, but internally we call it entity. So if you are sending transmittals from one country to another, then those two countries are different entities. That's what we will call them here. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to write it in your chat at appropriate times during this call. David will bring them up.
Timothy, can you comment just on having more than one entity in the same country?
Yes, perfect. So one reason why we're not using the term country is sometimes one country has separate legal organizations with their own unique reporting. They report to the government differently. They want to have their separate balance sheets. They want to have a different set of responsibility centers. So yeah, that's true. One country can have multiple entities. So to also make that distinction easier, that's why we're using the term entity. Okay, moving forward with definition of terms here, IT clear. So basically there's three different responsibility centers that are available to everyone that the transmittal system is using. So it's very important to know what these responsibility centers are and what you need to do with them. IT Clear is essentially the one that you should be most concerned with. So when you look at your RC balance report, in your RC balance report under section 11, you will see IT Clear. And the funds there represents funds that are supposed to land in the entity and needs to be moved to the correct local RC. So everything in IT Clear needs to be transferred to a local RC in your entity. Must be cleared as often as possible, daily or monthly at the latest. So one of the biggest issues that we've been having with regard to NetSuite is users would come in and look at their IT Clear balances, and it's so big and there's so many transactions in there. It's such an overwhelming task moving them to the correct local RC. So my suggestion is really to do it as often as possible. You can do it daily, that would be great. And every dollar or whatever your currency is, every number in IT Clear is a dollar that is not in the correct local RC. So the longer you delay moving funds away from IT Clear to the correct local RC, then the longer you are having inaccurate uh, balances in the correct local RC where they're supposed to be in. And so global RC, it represents funds meant to go out of the entity, going to other CCC entities. And it does not have to be zero every time, like IT Clear, but ideally when you close your period, it's zero or very close to that. If you have a positive balance in global, that means you need to create transmittal entries. So you have recorded funds that you need to create transmittal entries so that they should go out of your entity. And that will bring the global RC balance down. But if you have a negative balance, that means there's transmittal entries you created, but you have not yet put the funds into global RC first. And later on, we'll explain more about how that happens. And then with IT Contra, it represents the amount of money that your entity, is due to send to or receive from other ministries. So basically you really do not have any control about the IT contra balance. Do not make any journal entry that uses IT contra unless you really, really, really know what you're doing. So basically, the only time we will use this in a manual journal entry is if we make corrections. But on part of a normal process, we do not use this in a journal entry because um, when we create transmittal entries, IT contra is affected, but when we make payments, actually send the money to the other country, then IT contra also is cleared. So the only way that IP contra is cleared is when payments are made. So IT clear should be zero as often as possible. Global, ideally at period end, but should is zero, or basically as often as possible. But you don't need to be as stressed about it as IT clear. And then IT contra, do not touch it. So one illustration basically, if as we look at transmittal system, is a train, and so it runs on specific tracks, automatically carries passengers from one specific place to another. The source entity is where you board the train. The destination entity is where you leave the train, and the stations in the middle, perhaps the area offices and the world headquarters, if they go to different areas. And the reason I find the train illustration very useful is it it's very fast. So it goes from one entity to another basically the next day, and it's a very specific track. It's not like it gets um, in like if you the way you create your transmittal entry immediately determines how and where it goes as far as the destination entity. So I'll refer back to this illustration a few more times later during this training. And so,
So Timothy,
yes,
before you move on,
yep.
so does this mean that we shouldn't pay attention to the figures in IT contra?
So um, by pay attention, that's a great question. Yes, so you need to know what it represents. Meaning, so if you have a big balance in IT contra, that means you have received a lot of transmittal entries, but the payment has not been sent yet, for example. So that's what it represents. That because okay, so one what I find really useful when talking about transmittals is to illustrate the difference between the current system and the previous system. In the previous system before NetSuite, basically it happens once a month where both the information and the money arrive at the same time. When you receive the information now, you also basically expect the money in the exact dollar amount arriving in your bank today or give or take a few days. With NetSuite, it's different. The information arrives instantly, well, within 24 hours. When someone receives a donation in the Philippines meant to a staff member in the UK, the staff member in the UK should receive that information the next day. Um, so that's in their RC balance. But the actual money basically depends on the respective area offices. Like when the Philippines area office, Southeast Asia, gets their money or sends their money to the Philippines, and when the Western Europe area office sends their money to the UK. And so IT Contra represents that gap between when the information arrived and when the money actually arrives. But as far as the journal entries are concerned, as far as the accounting is concerned, you do not touch it. So, and then that's the positive IT contra. The negative contrabalance means that you've been creating transmittal entries but have not yet sent the payment. So other countries are receiving the information you are sending, but the actual money still has not left your country. So that in theory is the the idea behind it. So again, sorry, do not make journal entries against IT Contra unless, and I have to be perfectly honest as we go towards this. There's still a few issues that some technical glitches and bugs that being as we are still in our implementation year, we're still trying to fix. In the first few months of the transmittal entry, uh, there were some entries that were incorrectly made. So we've been trying to fix that. Hopefully, in the next few months, everything will be addressed. But as you gain a better understanding of the transmittal system and you realize that still things do not look right as far as the balances are concerned, then maybe it's a fix that we need to make that we have not caught. So we'd love to connect with you later to see if that's the reality in your end. Moving forward, again, the train. And we'll talk just a little bit about the outgoing part of the transmittals to give context to the incoming. Although, as I said, we'll be focusing on the incoming transmittals during this call.
Mhm.
So think of the global system RC as a bucket. So you fill it up and you so, and
Put
then
all
you
of
put
them.
things out of it. And so this RC, when donations and cash sales are made or internal donation transfers, used to be known as staff to staff transfers. So when these kinds of transmittals, when these kinds of entries are made, journal entries, so when these kinds of journal entries are made, the ones to the left, they create credits. The global system RC receives credits. And then when we receive, when we create a transmittal entry, when we create a transmittal entry in the process sending those donations and transfers out to another entity, then that creates debits out of the global system RC. So that's how you should look at the global RC. And a little bit more detail about that. The transmittal process will automatically run on any global designation identified. So when you create a donation and the designation is a global designation, then a transmittal entry will automatically be created for it. And so the transmittal entry captures the actual transmittal information that will be used to trigger the ICJE. So first, a journal entry is created that receives the donations, and then that journal entry that received the donations will create a transmittal entry, and then the transmittal entry will trigger ICJE. And then so the donor information is captured in the transmittal entry and carried forward with the donation. So that's the CRM part of it. And this happens every 10 p.m. UTC. So again, if the in your country the global designations are properly set up, then any other country, when they record a donation for those global designations, then the next day or that evening, the designation in your country will see the funds come in. So another issue that we see. So earlier I talked about the IT clear balance being so big in some countries and so unmanageable. So number one, it happens because you're not doing it often enough. And number two reason why that happens is you perhaps have designations that are not global. So if your designations are not global, that means another country who wants to send you funds have to manually create a donation transmittal entry, and those manually created transmittal entries will land in your IT clear. Now, if they land in your IT Clear, you have to create a manual journal entry, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes to transfer them to your local RC. But if your designations are properly set up with global designations, then it will skip IT Clear altogether and will go straight to your local RC. So we'll probably skip this. It's your turn part, and I'm going to go ahead and jump to the uh, what we actually need to do to receive incoming transmittals. Let me jump to that slide. Okay. So if we have, and in a few minutes, show, I'll switch to a NetSuite screen so you can see this in action. When you receive a donations uh, and internal donation transfers, um, there's basically two things that will happen. One is if the global designation is properly set up, they would immediately land in account 5111 in the final destination RC. You don't have to do anything, you just automatically go there. But the donations that land in account 5199 account and IT Clear RC will have to be redistributed by journal entries so that they can find their way into the final destination RC. So the goal again, the IT Clear must be zero and as often as possible. There's actually a third track here. If for countries that are not using NetSuite, for countries that are not using NetSuite, the donations sent to them, they will have to go to a Google Drive and download the information from there that they can use to put that in their journal. But we're not going to spend too much time on that. But if you so happen to be from a country that is not yet live in NetSuite, then I'll connect with you more later. Send an email if you want more explanation about that Google Drive and the information that we're supposed to get from there. So some details on what to actually do on that 5199 IT Clear. So first we need to review and clear the account 5199 with IT Clear at least monthly, but hopefully more often than that. There will be donations and staff-to-staff transfers, or we'll be calling them internal donation transfers, received from other entities that did not specify a global designation. And for other income, so it's not just donations that go to 5199 IT Clear, also other income. So these could be someone, another entity paying you for like conference expenses or other things that are not donations and also are not subsidies. And so before I move to the next part of this slide, we'll switch to my NetSuite screen.
And everyone, this is a good chance to put questions in the chat. I am watching every question that comes in, and some of them I might hold to the end, but please enter them in the chat.
Yeah. But if are there questions that maybe feel like can be answered right now?
I think you've answered everything so far, Timothy. Thank you.
Okay.
Doing a good job, man.
Welcome. So one of the saved searches that I created recently is this transmittal reconciliation 5199. There you go. This is available to everyone. I know there are some countries who are more advanced with their report making skills that have already created something like this. But if you need help in looking for your 5199 IT Clear transactions, just look for this search. Look for the save search. Type it in your global search box. If this proves to be useful enough and I see lots of people using it, then we can consider including it in the menu path. maybe in reports, saved searches somewhere here in this menu path. But for now, you can just note this down, type it in your global search box. And one thing that this saved search does is it only filters transactions coming into your entity hitting the account 5199. And another important thing that this saved search does is it filters by date created. So there's lots of different dates that are attached to transactions. Normally, when you generate uh, most reports and searches and it has one date field, then that's the transaction date. That's the date that is attached to the journal entry. And a lot of times, and this has been one thing that has caused difficulty with reconciling transmittal entries in the past, is say right now it's September 5th. Someone somewhere created a transmittal entry today. So the date created is today, September 5th, but they manually keyed in a transaction date of February 1. So if in your attempt to clear out your IT clear and you're just filtering by the transaction date, then so you know that you've already cleared out your IT clear since end of August. You're good. As of August, you're good. So you will only look for transactions with a date between August 1 to August 5, right? So if you only look for transactions with a date of August 1 to August 5, you will not see the February 1 dated transaction if the report you're using filters only by the transaction date. So one useful thing in this report is it filters by the date created. So regardless of the transaction date, you will be able to see new entries created since the last time you did your reconciliation. So if you did your reconciliation August 31, then just put in the date created September 1 to today, then you will see the new entries coming in regardless of their transaction date. So, yep.
Timothy, is it possible to have a negative IT clear? And if so, what does that mean? What are the implications of that?
Is it possible to have a negative IT clear? Um, yes, so that would be possible because it is taking a long time to load. I'm just going to switch back to my screen here. Uh, One reason why we can have a negative IT clear is let me think. Um, so if so IT clear is created when you receive funds that you need to send that you need to clear to your local RCs. Um, so as far as the transmittal entry is concerned, as far as the transmittal system is concerned, it will only add to the IT clear balance or credit IT clear balance. Um, so any debit or any thing that takes funds out of IT clear is caused by something else. So perhaps it's someone in your office creating a journal entry, attempting to clear IT clear but clearing too much. Or so that's one big possibility that you removed too much out of IT clear than what actually came in from the transmitter system. Now, if that's not the case, then I'll go back to what I said earlier about some bugs that we had to fix, some initial errors that happened with the transmittal system in the first few months, and we had to fix some of those. So that's also still a possibility. I'm not 100% sure that we have actually cleaned up all the effects from those first few months errors. And I saw a question pop up, but I didn't read it fast enough. Is
So
there a question from? Yep.
Timothy, Tomas was just making the point that charges from other countries are also coming into the RCIT clear as debits, and they land on 8999.
That's right. So let me go back to the net research. So I created separate transmittal reconciliation searches for 5199 for donations and other income, 5699 for subsidies, which you need to clear either to 5611 or to 5621 if they're allocations, and then 8999 for charges. So they will all use the IT Clear RC. I find separating them into these three accounts is more helpful rather than just look at this huge IT Clear balance, but at least separating them by these accounts makes things a bit more manageable. So charges would come to 8999, subsidies and allocations to 56, and donations and other income. So this is about donations, and in the name field, so again, this is where something new as far as NetSuite is concerned. It's important to select the appropriate vendor. So vendor and customer, so vendors basically are entities we pay, and customers are entities that we receive money from. So when we create journal entries taking things out of IT Clear, it's also very, it's not it's not necessarily critical. I mean, it's okay if we don't, but it will be very, very helpful for us if we populate the name field because it will help us get the right information later. For example, now that part of the year-end tasks is to itemize incoming, like your fives and sixes. And so if you uh, faithfully populate the name field with which country you receive it from or which country you're sending it to, it will greatly help the um, itemization of your 5 and 6 later. So again, if you have something in your IT Clear, you remove from funds from 5199 IT Clear by a debit, and you put funds into your 5111 RC with a credit. So usually the transmittal entries will have this field called other important information that should help you know which RC they need to be put in your local books. And so, golden rule, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. If you are creating transmittal entries, try to put as much information in the other important information as you can just to be able to help out the other entity know what to do with those transmittal entries.
So Timothy, what happens in the worst case scenario if a transaction comes into IT Clear without anything in the name field and you just need help figuring it out? What's the process for figuring out those mysteries?
So I wouldn't actually call that a worst case scenario. There's much worse things that can happen. Because the fact that you identify that it's a transmittal entry, there's just no information coming in, then that's simply just ask. If at least you know the source entity. So let me go back to our NetSuite screen and demonstrate that a little bit. I'll go back to my training here. So I opened up certain screens before this call. I hope they would still load. Okay, good. Uh, if in a list, so this is for example an advanced ICJE that was created from a transmittal, and
what, Timothy, what is an ICJE for French speakers?
oh, I'm not sure. I'm going to need help for that one. I'm not sure how it is actually translated in French. So it's an intercompany journal entry, but
that's good enough. Thank
yeah.
you.
So the intercompany journal entry. So where was I? I'm going to show a transmittal entry. So I'm going to open a transmittal entry list here. And to show how to see the different information that I was talking about, go back to my training account. So transmittal entry list. So again, this is in the training environment, so all information you see here are fictional. So one quick tip here, if in your transmittal entry list, you see that the name is structured like this, for example, cash sale and number, then that means this was a transmittal entry automatically created from a donation. So a donation was keyed into a correct global designation, and it went its way through the transmittal system, and it landed directly into the local RC, or at least as a transmittal entry to your country. So it's not a transmittal entry created manually, but it's a transmittal entry created from a donation. So if we dig into this particular transmittal entry, so you will see that this transmittal entry was created with a source and with a destination. Source Andorra, destination New Zealand. So if there's nothing else, if there's no other information that is put in, at the very least you know who the source is, and then you can know basically who to ask. So you can ask your area office, so they can ask that other areas area office, can ask their country for more details about this. Or if you're in New Zealand and the finance leader in Andorra is your friend, then maybe you can just email him directly. And so let's go back to our slide.
Timothy, I just want to point out the time.
Yes, I did see. I said at the beginning I'd be keeping my eye on the time, but forgetting that it's so easy to ignore that. So yes, so this is about the donations, and the next few slides are simply about how to handle the different types of transmittals, specifically expenses and charges. So the difference is the account that they use, but it still went to IT Clear. And then uh, so it's basically the same thing. Instead of going to 5199, it went to 8999, and then you have to move it to your local expense account, but still using the name field. And the next part are other income, which would also go use 5199. So at this point, this would be the point where I was thinking of ending a bit and seeing if there's questions, more questions that we can discuss, or if there's any pressing questions we can uh, talk about during this call.
So a couple questions. One, Abraham said, in the name field for national entities, should they choose the U.S. subsidiary, like FFC in their case, or WHQ?
Yes, great question. So the name field should only so uh, put in the entity directly next. So it should just be so if you're the country, then usually that will be your area office. Just the direct next entity that will receive or send the funds, because the ultimate source and destination is here at the header. So the source and destination, the ultimate source and destination is the header, and what you see in the name field are just the next one. So let me, so in this transmittal entry, you can actually see the different ICJEs that it triggered creating. So if you scroll down from a transmittal entry, then if I click here, so I said ICGEs have a GL impact on multiple entities, but because of my role, I can only see the GL impact on the Andorra side. But we know that it also had a GL impact on the area office side. And you can see here that the name has been automatically filled in by the transmittal system, which is so EWC is the area office in Western Europe, and Andorra is the country. So that would be what the name field is. So if you're moving transactions away from the 99, make sure that you also use the name field.
Timothy, a question from Lloyd. He said he'd be glad to know the computation of outstanding IT balances from IFM, for example, at the area office level.
Outstanding IT balances. So now we're talking about payments. So we didn't really talk about payments. We only talk about the entries. So let's move a little bit into that. So when we so I said one of the things I said earlier is in our brave new world of NetSuite, the information and the actual cash arrive separately. And so say you just send payments at the end of each month. So and each day of that month you're creating entries and information is getting sent. But then at the end of the month, you want to see how much entries were created during this month so you can create the proper payment. And so let me go back to my slides and backtrack a little bit about the payments where so when you receive basically so again this is about receiving the payment when your area office so I'm as I talk with the country office for example here when your area office sends you the funds then it will debit your 1311 account and at the same time clear the IT contrasts that were created from the information sent during the month. And then now you have to move that 1311 to your local bank account. But so I just say all this as a background on what happens during the payment and what you need to do. So going back to Lloyd's question, the calculations, what I have found most useful, well, I mean, I'm a little biased because I created the search, but um, you are very free to. So the reason why I created this search is to help me answer Lloyd's question. So again, there are some areas and countries that really quickly gain expertise in creating paid searches. So I would love to connect with you during OLC with the trade notes. But this search that I created, Transmittal Reconciliation Journals Payments, this is basically the answer to Lloyd's question on what transactions constitute the payment balance, if I understand Lloyd's question correctly. So this search filters by four accounts, 5399, 6399, 1239, and 2239. So any transaction that hits those accounts would be what would constitute your transmittal payment balance. And if you run this report and filter by the date, meaning the the date would be after you last did your payment to today, then it will show you all the transactions that hit those four accounts, which should equal what is in your transmittal payment balance that you'd see if you create your transmittal payments new and calculate balances. If you do your transmittal payments new, calculate balances, you just see the number there, the one figure there. The breakdown of that number you'll be able to find if you run this report.
Timothy, another question, this one from VG. If the global designations are created by loading a designation template, how do you check the correctness of it? How do you know what's wrong with an entry which lands on 5199 in IT clear, and how do you correct it?
Okay. So let me go back to our training environment. And so here, for example, you have an ICJE uh, that uh, was created as a result of a transmittal entry. And let me go back to its source here. Okay, let me just do it from the beginning. So all your designations come in through lists accounting items. If you go to your list accounting items, this is a list of all your designations. So if you had typed it in manually or loaded them in via spreadsheet, this is where they end up. So the first few pages will be global designations, but if you want to go see your local designations, just go to this drop down here and go to the very last part. Let's scroll down a little bit. So these will be your local designations. And one of the views here, um, so here you will see the designation, but let me open this again in production. Show you that same list because we've modified this list in production where you'll see more information. This uh, so right now I sorted this. This is filtered by just the designation showing the historic donation RC because this is good. There's no designation that goes to historic donation RC. But normally, if you go to lists and accounting items and see the list of your designations, then in this page, you will see which RC it goes to, what USA designation it uses. So if you go to this page, really the things you should check is are they connected to the correct assessment? Are they connected to the right RCs? And so if you're not seeing this exact set of information, go to your view and look for this name, view, designations with US designation numbers. So again, recapping that, lists, accounting items, and make sure your view is designations with US designation numbers. And so really quickly, you can see that your designations, they're set up correctly.
Thanks, Timothy. That answered VG's question. Timothy, it's almost the top of the hour. Are you okay continuing? Because we can continue this recording, and if people need to drop off, that's fine. I'd love for you to get through all your information.
Yes, so I would love to stay. I think we can continue. Everyone who needs to go can go, but yeah, I'm up for staying for a few more minutes. If there's more questions.
Mimi, I think I'm not able to mute you for some reason. If you can mute yourself. Thank you. Timothy, have you made it through your whole deck?
The ones that I'm intending to cover today, because others are more overview and I feel like can also be appropriately covered in the outgoing Transmittals webinar next month, and we could certainly also go there now, but
okay.
Can also.
So, and I put this in the chat. Not only will the videos be available, but Timothy's deck will be available. By the way, Timothy, Ira had some encouraging words for you. She said, thank you for sharing the reconciliation searches. I just found something to be corrected, and I wouldn't have found it without those. So thanks for your work, Timothy. And also, this view is very helpful, too, from Ira. So a really specific question. What exactly should be in the name field, country or a specific person?
So the answer is both, depending on what you are trying to do. So the name field captures three different records within NetSuite: employee, vendor, and customer. So I'm not just talking about transmittals here. I'm stepping back a little bit for context. So vendor are are entities that you pay, so mostly your outgoing transmittals. Customer is for entities that you receive money from, and employee are internal entities. So if we're not talking about transmittals, say we can talk about advances, for example. With advance, you use one account, 1511, you use one RC, none. But the way you know who the advance is for is through the name field, which is the employee. So in that sense, the answer to that question would be person. So the name field is a very flexible field where it can handle these any of these different kinds of records depending on the specific transaction being made. So in the context of transmittals, the vendor and the customer are other countries.
Thanks, Timothy. Hey, before and again, we'll stay on and answer questions for a while, but if before people start leaving, too many people start leaving, I just wanted to say to everybody, as I mute everyone again.
I think you made me the owner, so I think I'm the one with the power.
Well, yeah. Can you see if you can mute me? I just wanted to give a word of encouragement to everybody. You know, some of you don't get to hear from me or from Timothy very often, but I want to tell you from my seat leading the NetSuite implementation, how appreciative I am of all of you, how proud I am of all of you. What we're trying to do this year by switching 156 countries from one system to another is a gargantuan task. It's a huge task. And I know that this has been difficult for some of you because it's new. It's a new learning. But the promise of NetSuite is so great. The abilities, once we get used to it, once we learn it, the things we'll be able to do are going to really make our jobs better. And more importantly, they're going to allow us to steward God's resources much more effectively, much more openly, and help our field staff do their job really well. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work that you do, and also remind you that in any big change like this, it always is worse before better. In other words, things get much more difficult before they get a lot easier. And you can just expect that. As you transition to NetSuite, things will get harder, but eventually they'll get a lot easier. So thank you all for hanging in and learning. We really appreciate and know how hard you're working. Okay, any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. We'll hang out for a few more minutes.
And let me also remind people to answer the poll. Well, we have 70 participants in this call, 70. If you can't see a poll screen, there's a three dots at the bottom menu. If you click those three dots, you'll see a polling option, and just click and answer them. So we have a great idea of who's in this call, and we can also
so
see how.
VG just asked a question about, is there any update on the mobile app? So many of you know that NetSuite comes with a mobile app. You can find it in the App Store. You can find it in the various phone stores. And we're not encouraging people to use the mobile app yet because it's not a great product yet. And so we're talking with NetSuite about some developmental things they need to do on the app. It does some things well, but it also has some problems. And we want to be really careful about releasing the app to to our field staff and making them frustrated. So we'll be talking about the mobile app more in the next few months, because we know what a possible great tool it is once we get some of the kinks worked out of it. So know that this is a priority for us, is to get that into your hands in a useful way. Timothy Percy asks if you could teach us how to use the trial balance with name and how to solve if some transactions are recorded without the name field.
That would be my pleasure. So let me see if I have that in training. So that's a great reminder too, though, that there's a lot of customized reports out there, and customizing reports in NetSuite is a skill that all of us need to have. So let me see if I can share my screen again. It's no longer like a certain level of expertise in the tool is no longer a luxury, but really a necessity for our finance office people now. And so one such customization is a trial balance with name. So maybe it's not here in training. So I'm not quite sure exactly what Percy's question is on how to use the report, but so normally when you go to your trial balance reports, financial trial balance, right? And it will show you see if you can see that the whole thing. It will show you just a trial balance with the accounts and debits, credits, but there's a customized version out there with that breaks down that amount with the name field. So if so in addition to debit credit, there's the name field here. So with what Percy is asking, for example, you have your 1239 account broken down by these different names. And so the total 1239 balance would just be this, but you know that part of them goes to these particular countries. And this is also what I'm referring to earlier with being able to itemize your fives and sixes, which is so normally if you just open your trial balance, you have your total 51s. But if you expand that and you've been using the name field, then you know that this total 5 balance can be broken down into these different countries. And that's what we need basically when we say we want to itemize the fives and sixes, is by breaking the balance down into the particular customers and vendors. Does that make sense? Or answers your question?
Thank you, Timothy. Percy, feel free to chat if you have a follow-up question.
So you will see here that there's a big amount that does not have a name field. That means there's still a bunch of transactions where the name field is blank. If the name field is blank, then obviously you can't get any information, whatever report you create. So it's basically needing to either create journal entries to fill in that information or to edit those actual transactions.
Okay, I'll put the call out for a last question, and then if there isn't another question, we're gonna bring this webinar to an end. Any final questions? Out of the thousands of questions I know you have. Okay, Timothy, thank you so much. It's obvious how well you're doing at learning this, and I feel like if you can stay a step ahead of all of us, we all benefit. One last question. one last question, Timothy, and that is Mina asked, can you upload 1 month trial balance?
Can you upload a 1 month trial balance? I'm not quite sure exactly what that's asking.
Mina, if that's an important question for you, can you just send it into netsuite.help@crew.org?
If the question is to upload 1 month's worth of transactions, yes, sure, you can do that. Although ideally, if your country is live, then instead of simply uploading transactions, you're actually using donations, expense reports, the other things within NetSuite.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Mina, Lloyd said he'll follow up with you on that one because I think he understands. Lloyd, it's great to have you back, man. So, friends, I'm going to stop our recording right here. And again,